Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Okay, all right. You know you should be eating better. I got it. Sometimes you need a little bit of help. Sometimes you derail. And she's here to help you out. She is the Eat Well guru. Dr. Maryam Dadkhah joins us again. How are you, Dr. Dadkhah?
I'm doing well. How are you, Steve?
Fantastic. Yeah. By the way, the website is eatwellguru.com. We've covered a whole bunch of different topics in the past, but we've never hunkered down on this one. And that's digestive issues or challenges, which a lot of us have. Sometimes we don't want to talk about it, but it's like the elephant in the room. Sometimes you have problems and maybe there's reasons that are leading up to those problems, right?
That's so true.
So where do we start with digestive health? Are we talking about, things that we're allergic to, which we did center on a couple of podcasts back? Where does it all begin?
So I would say it all begins with the fiber. Okay. And I tell you what, fiber is the main concern that is going to affect the gut health the most for so many reasons. One is most of our digestive system runs by what we call them probiotics. And fiber is very critical to these probiotics. What we know from the epidemiological studies that we in the US, we don't get enough fiber in our diet for so many reasons. We don't get enough fruits and vegetables, either from the excess or from the food habits. Most of our grains are refined grains. We might not get that much of beans and legumes because of the gas and bloating and things like that. Put them all together means our fiber consumption is going to be much less than what we know that is good for a healthy gut.
Yeah, and with the fiber, you have to drink a lot. You have to drink.
That's so true. That's so true. Because I do have people that they do everything for the eating, but they're not willing to drink enough water and they still have problems. So they keep saying, oh, it's not working. Well, if you don't drink enough water, the fiber is not working. So you need to basically combine them together.
So when we talk about fiber, what is a daily intake? What should we be trying to hit?
So let's say anywhere between 25 to 35 is the minimum. It's not the max, it's the minimum that we need to get. And then on average, they said 15 grams, but I see so many people, they hardly even hit the 5 grams of fiber in a day.
Wow.
Very, very bad.
What I'm doing in my brain right now is recounting labels that I've read of how much fiber is in things that, I may have eaten in the last week, too, whatever. And then hearing that number, like 25 plus 30 grams.
25 to 35, yes.
Yeah, I don't know. It's, I like wraps. So I eat a wrap that is low in carbs. Not right, not like I'm trying not to eat a lot of carbs, but I actually like the way it tastes. Like it's got a nice texture to it, and there's a decent amount of carbs in that. But what are some not great sources of fiber, but okay sources? Because we can talk about eating beans, and we can talk about bran and things like that. What's a decent source of fiber?
So one thing that I have to clear is fiber is a type of carbs. Is a type of carbohydrate, but it's a carbohydrate that is not digestible to our body, but it's digestible to many probiotics.
Okay, let's pause right there because I want to make sure I have it clear. And maybe this is a misconception for a lot of us, but on the package where you deduct a certain number of carbs or whatever it comes out to be, and that's the fiber, and the net, what is it? The net carbs? I'm trying to remember what it is, but I'm looking at.
When you say carbs or carbohydrate on the food label, the fiber is one of the subcategory of carbohydrates. Then they do have the sugar. Then they do have an added sugar. So let's say if it's 15 grams of carb and 11 grams of fiber, then it might have added sugar or not added sugar. But then basically that is 4 grams of some sort of starch or something like that that you can digest completely. And then 11 grams are in the form of fiber.
Is it okay fiber though, when it's done that way?
So most of the times, yes, they are. So
Okay.
there are so many different subcategories of fiber. It's not just one kind.
Okay.
Main
I feel better now.
Right. The 2 main ones are the soluble one and insoluble one. But if you look more closely, we do have way more than just these 2. But with some of, let's say, the wraps that you're saying, it's very hard to make it 100% whole wheat, whole grain.
Yep.
Let's say I was talking to my sister. She said, I'm doing the whole wheat bread, but I cannot do 100% whole wheat flour because it doesn't make it right. So I need to mix it half and half. So basically what they do in many of these cases that you see the fiber is so high, it's not that they use a whole wheat bread, they add the fiber manually in addition to that from different sources of fiber.
Interesting. You know, I had this realization the other day. Back in the day, I'm talking like 15 years ago, 20, whatever, you could go into some place and get a bran muffin. They don't sell them anymore. And if they do, it's like a cake muffin, but they used to sell like real, true, delicious bran muffins. Now, if you're lucky, you get maybe a blueberry muffin, which again, is just all sugar and everything. But to your point, it's harder for us to get fiber easily, even just something like that.
Right. So basically what you need to do is choose the food items that is the least processed, especially when it comes to the grains. So let's say if you do brown rice, if you do steel cut oats, if you do quinoa, if you do beans and legumes, these are the best way to get your fiber from for these grains and beans and legumes. But basically, many times, if you want to get them from the ones that are processed, it's harder. It's much harder.
Gotcha.
And one thing that we have to realize that, unfortunately, carbohydrate is the villain nutrients these days, and everyone thinks that carbohydrate is bad and cut it in different ways, on forms and shapes. It is not. And many of those bacteria, they really need some quality carbs to work well and help with our digestive system. And when you don't give them that, don't expect a good working digestive system. I give you an example. Many of the people that they go on ketogenic diet, that is the carbohydrate is very low. What they're going to do is, and then they're going to do basically some vegetables, limited vegetables, mostly meat, and a lot of fat. Constipation is in the horizon. They hardly get that much of fiber. They hardly get enough carbohydrate. So those bacteria are not going to survive, and then you don't expect a good, healthy working gut health.
Gotcha.
The fact that I also need to mention is physical activity also is important. So don't expect to sit down and lay down hours and hours a day, which many of us are way above that 7 to 8 hours of sitting the whole day, and expect a nice working gut, because it's not going to do it.
A really great point. And
for a working gut health.
I'm glad you said that, because personal information. I used to remember, like, when I go for a jog and I come back from my jog, first thing I do is got to hit the bathroom, because I guess it just moves things along. I don't know.
It does. Exactly. That's a good point.
So, refried beans. We talked about beans, bad, good.
So good question. So one thing that we know is those gut bacteria, they are very specific with their diet or what they like. Many times, if we have a very high animal protein, very high what we call refined grains. What do they do in refined beans? They might mash them and they might add a lot of sugar or sweets or sweetened beverages. Those gut bacteria are not a big fan of those ones. So to answer your questions, is not the healthiest thing. It can give us some fiber, but it gives us with a lot of sugar. So let's say the same case with the fermented foods like yogurt. If you do plain non-fat yogurt, you can introduce good healthy bacteria to your system. If you do the sugary ones with tons of sugar added, not so much. Those bacteria are not the good ones are a fan of.
And I would think if we're talking yogurt, and we might have mentioned this once before, but Greek yogurt is good, I would assume, for added protein, or no?
So here's the thing. Greek protein has way more protein and less carbs. The regular yogurt has more carbs, less protein. Is one better than the other? No, not really. So it's unless we have to see the situation. So if you need more protein, yes, the Greek protein is a good approach. If you're getting enough protein, which in most people, unless you're a strict vegetarian, then not getting enough animal protein and not doing a good job with your diet, yeah, the Greek yogurt makes sense. But in other cases, they both are pretty much the same.
You know, because of marketing, one would be led to believe that we have a question about soybeans. That's on my head. We'll get to that next. But one would be led to believe that Greek yogurt is healthier. That was my thought, because
not really, not necessarily.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. By the way, we're talking about digestive health and issues with Dr. Maryam Dadkhah. She is the Eat Well Guru at eatwellguru.com. And Kelly is checking in from Ocean City, Maryland. She says, I love soybeans as a snack. Is it good for you?
It's great. It's a great snack. And it's in the beans and legumes. So beans and legumes are on top of the list when it comes to their fiber content. Despite that, everyone is basically complaining, they are the best source of fiber. So yes, go for it.
Okay.
100%.
So I had this conversation over the weekend, took a road trip with some friends, and my one friend has diverticulitis. And I'm not even 100% sure what it is, but he has challenges with his digestive system. Definitely over the weekend, he had some challenges, and I think he thinks there's more to it. So he's going to get endoscopy and a colonoscopy next week. But what is diverticulitis?
Steve, I know a good dietitian that you can set.
Yeah. Let me think about that for a second. Yeah, she's right over there.
So here's the thing. That's an interesting question. For longest time, let's say 20, 30 years ago, we had this belief, and we were telling the patients, oh, nuts and seeds and things like that are not good for your diverticulitis. So what ended up with people with diverticulitis is they would go with this low fiber diet, and things get worse and worse, and they would get more flare-ups. They've done more studies. They look at this recommendation and see there is no science behind it. Now, what we do with the diverticulitis is actually we need them to have a very high fiber diet, unless they get their flare-ups. But if they have high fiber diet, of course, it comes with high hydration. So we need to get enough water with the high fiber diet, and then physical activity. So what they need to do is basically they need to have a regular bowel movement, which means at least every day. And then on top of that, they should avoid being constipated. And they basically need to watch their gut regularity very closely to prevent the flare-ups to happen.
Yeah, and it's on his radar, and he gets a lot of physical activity. He's like a ping pong ball, bouncing balls. He's like
and then
moving all over.
Here's a couple of other things that we need to remember, Steve, about what you told me about the travel. So the other thing is our body likes to work like clockwork. So to have the bowel movement at a certain time every single day. Let's say if you go on travel, you might leave earlier, or you might have so many things that would be postponed for later. So you might not have your gut bowel movement at 8 a.m. like always do. That is something that is going to cause some problems. Then you go on this travel, you're sitting for how many years in the car, in the airplane, then you're not moving as much. You might go to a bathroom and come back, but it's not by any means a physical activity. Then depending on where you're going, the fiber intake, the food choices might be different. So it might drop down dramatically. then you're worried about finding bathroom closely. So the hydration is another issue. So it's basically a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I always suggest my patients, hey, take something like those wraps. I take a high fiber cereal. I suggest Fiber One Original. I take it myself when I go on travel. Make sure you watch your hydration. Whenever you're at home, drink as much more. So make sure that you move more when you get to that place. Make sure that you have a regular bowel movement. So all of these needs to be considered when we go on a travel. These are the things that people don't think that they matter, but they matter a lot, and it makes a big difference.
It totally does, because think about it this way. You're 2 days into your vacation. You haven't gone to the bathroom. We're not being disgusting here. This is just life. This is what we're talking about.
It is life. Yeah, you're totally right.
And now what's your vacation going to feel like? You feel bloated, gassy, you're wearing a bathing suit, you just feel uncomfortable. And, if you take the steps prior to that, and yeah, you nailed it. Like, it should be every day around the same time. And let's not forget, you're on vacation. So what are you doing? You're eating crazy. You're not even thinking about what you're eating either.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
And then, hey, you go for those items that you won't have access on daily basis, or they're famous in that place. You're not going to choose the whole wheat, the whole grain, the pizza, legumes, and salad on regular basis. You go for the ones that you haven't had for a while. So that doesn't help the situation either.
Not to mention, whatever you're eating, your system is looking at that coming down saying, what is that? We've never eaten that before. I don't know how to deal with that.
Right. And then here you mentioned Ocean City. I went to Ocean City a couple of times for vacation. They are famous for having all these sweets places. So to make things more complicated, what you're getting is ice cream and custard and just frozen. So I'm just saying that one factor after another factor is not going to help with the gut health when you're on vacation.
Yeah, not to mention, every other place you go has alcohol. So you're on vacation. It's like, all right, hey, I'm going to stop here. I Ubered here. I'm not going to worry about it. We're on vacation. Let's have some fun. But you got to make sure that, the system is working well, shall we say?
That's a good point. Yes, exactly.
What are some of the other digestive issues that you come across as a registered dietitian?
So one that is very common is the IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome.
Sure.
Now, many times I'm suspecting that people are not doing all these things, like getting enough fiber, getting enough water. They are on this restrictive diet. It's very common these days that people cut carbs. The carbs is the bad one right now. And then not getting enough physical activity or have a very sedentary life. So they might get 1 hour of physical activity, but let's say they might sit 10, 12 hours a day. So many times my approach is to basically start having them on a higher fiber diet and keep differentiating their fibers to get to a better place. One thing that I've seen though is there is a diet that is very common that is recommended called FODMAP diet. That is recommended for just 2 to 6 weeks. It's an elimination diet. So basically they eliminate anything that can cause gas and bloating and fermented food and fiber. They all are basically eliminating them for 2 to 6 weeks. It's a little bit complicated diet, and it works. It works for some people to help with their conditions. It hasn't started as an evidence science-based diet, but now they're adding some science and evidence to it over the years. But the problem is sometimes people go on this FODMAP diet and stay on it for the rest of their life. And they become so afraid to adding foods back, and they become very malnourished. Then, or they are on that, and then the gastric health comes back because it's a very low fiber diet. And they say, oh, I'm doing it, but I do have all these other problems. And I said, okay, so if you think that is working, then why you're on this diet, why you're here? Oh, it helped, but I do have these issues. So I'm just saying that sometimes we forget these kind of the diets are very temporary and they can give some relief. But if you don't get that relief that you're looking for, then you have to stop doing that. You need to basically change the course of action and see what is the root cause is. Another very, very, very common is as soon as someone has any digestive issue, they are recommended to be on a lactose-free or gluten-free diet. Those are very common ones. So the lactose intolerance is very common, no question about it. But one thing that we need to consider with lactose intolerance is the spectrum, meaning that most people just react to milk, but they can tolerate yogurt, cheese, and other stuff. That's one thing. The other one is fermented foods are part of the lactose. So let's say if you don't do any lactose, then you have to eliminate yogurt as things like kefir, that they are good fermented foods if you choose the plain one. So they cannot help with your gut health. And many times you see that these people are selective. So they choose the cheese and ice cream to stay in their diet, but they eliminate all the dairy products, which to me is, hey, so do you have problems with them or you don't? So they basically pick and choose when they want to eat it or they don't want to eat it. And they don't do the test. There is a test to say if you have lactose intolerance or not. That is done by a gastroenterologist. So you need to go to the specialist to run the actual test for you.
You're so right about that, because a lot of people in my circles say they're lactose intolerant. Maybe they are, again, different degrees, but did they get tested? I don't think not one did.
No,
think,
no. I guess we have a tendency just put label on it and say this is. So one thing that I've noticed, sometimes when we don't want to take responsibility, we want to blame all these other things. It's easier to say I have all these things that take responsibility and change things.
Sure.
But it doesn't apply to everyone. So some people might have a real issue. The other one that I also see is the gluten sensitivity. That is very, very, very common. Again, I've seen with so many people, they are very selective. Again, it comes along with that carb being a villain. So many of these gluten-free diet, you see that they don't do the whole wheat, whole grain, those items that are healthier, but they choose the sweets on regular basis. And sometimes I question, so if you're gluten-free, how come you eat sweets or desserts? And it's just once in a while. And I always ask, if you have the gluten sensitivity as you think, then how come this one is okay? Or they want to go to restaurants and have those foods. So the problem, if you're asking me, most of the times are not gluten sensitivity or lactose intolerance, unless they are basically confirmed by the test, by the legit test by the gastroenterologist, is mostly not getting the fiber and physical activity, enough hydration, fermented foods.
So maybe they're sensitive to lactose and sensitive to gluten, but not really fully diagnosed.
Intolerance. That's so true.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Another trap that I also see that is very common is many people think that these digestive health issues are allergies and things like that. And there are some tests out there that they are not evidence-based. They are actually fraud. And there are, unfortunately, so many providers that they distribute those ones and have patients to go through doses. And then patient comes back with a whole list of the foods, items that they're sensitive or allergic to, which is not true because those tests are not accurate tests. And I always question them. No, did you go to a gastroenterologist? You have to, the insurance would pay for it. You don't have to pay this much money for something that we don't have enough evidence for it. So those are other traps that I've seen when people have gastric issues fall into.
When the test that you just mentioned, where do people find that test? Where is that? If they're finding them, but they're not going to a gastroenterologist?
So there are some providers that offer that. So those places, they reach out to the providers. They reach out to me a few times in the past and they say, we'll test you and it can test everything for you. And they do. I don't know what exactly they do, what they test to get those results, but they're not evidence-based and insurance won't pay for it. So people need to pay cash for it.
Wow.
And if you're
what you're saying is you could,
fraud.
if you've got insurance, why are you doing that when you can just go to the gastro doctor and get a legit test that insurance will pay for?
Because many patients to go to gastroenterologist might need to talk to their primary care physician to get the referral. It's a little bit discomfort, or it takes a while to get to the gastroenterologist to get doses. So it has some levels of discomfort to get to the gastroenterologist rather than just these easy tests that might be available. And I get so many of those calls. Oh, will you do this test and that test? And I said, no, I'm not going to do that because those are not accurate. I cannot rely on them, and I don't want patients to rely on them.
We got a couple of minutes left, and I just want to know that test to see if you're, let's say, lactose intolerant, or you have a gluten issue, and you get that test, a legit test by your gastro doc. What do they do in that test?
So let's say for the lactose intolerance, it's a breast test. They give you the lactose and they measure the hydrogen in your breast test to confirm that if you have lactose intolerance or not. For the gluten sensitivity, is initially a blood test that they are looking at the antiglobulin to see if you have a gluten sensitivity, and it needs to be at a certain levels to be confirmed. And you need to have the gluten containing items in your diet. So one mistake that people make, they are on a gluten-free diet for who knows how much, and they hardly have that much of gluten containing items, and they go for the test and the test becomes negative. That's not the right way to do that. You need to have it when you go for that test. And then when that test becomes positive, then the gastroenterologist, which is a gold standard, is need to do a biopsy of your intestine to confirm that you have what we call them celiac, or a true gluten sensitivity or intolerance.
Wow. Boy, good information. This is stuff that I think we've all wondered about, how it works. And that's why you do what you do. And the one thing that people probably don't realize is the fact that what you do is many times covered by insurance, right?
It is, yes.
Like, why wouldn't you? I don't.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, you're paying for insurance, and here's somebody that can help you out with all different aspects. And you are what you eat. I hate to use that cliche.
Exactly.
You're putting in your body things that probably aren't the best things. So
yes,
work with an amazing registered dietitian and nutritionist, and that is the Eatwellguru. And Dr. Maryam Dadkhah, thanks for being with us. So insightful what we talked about today.
Good. I'm glad that you benefit from talking about digestive health, huh?
Yeah, I'm funny. Yes, we talked about going to the bathroom. Get over it, people. It's okay. Eatwellguru.com, and go there and get a consult and feel better and live better. And Dr. Dadkhah, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.